It was supposed to be a quiet evening, a chance for Kiera to enjoy some solitude while her parents were away. Kiera, a young woman in her early 20s, had always cherished moments of peace, relishing the opportunity to immerse herself in her favorite books and TV shows. The old Victorian house they lived in, with its creaking floors and antique furniture, had always held a certain charm, though it also had an eerie quality that Kiera often dismissed. She had grown accustomed to the odd sounds the house made, often attributing them to the quirks of an old home. But tonight, the stillness felt different, heavy, almost expectant, as if the house itself was holding its breath. As the night deepened, Kiera settled into her favorite armchair with a cup of tea, her eyes glued to the pages of a mystery novel. The sudden ring of the phone startled her, pulling her from the story. Glancing at the clock, she noticed it was almost midnight. Who could be calling at this hour? She hesitated before answering, a sense of unease creeping up her spine. Hello, her voice was steady, despite the growing apprehension she felt. Hello, Kiera, a distorted voice replied. The caller's tone was calm, almost familiar, yet she couldn't place it. Who is this, she asked, a slight tremor betraying her nerves. Just someone who knows you well, the voice answered cryptically before the line went dead. Kiera stared at the phone, her heart pounding. She brushed it off as a prank, perhaps a friend messing around. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the voice carried an undertone of something more sinister. The calls continued throughout the night, each one revealing unsettling details about Kiera's life, her favorite childhood toys, the spot where she used to hide during hide and seek, and even the name of her first pet. The more the voice revealed, the more Kiera's unease grew. It felt as if the caller was inside her head, pulling memories she hadn't thought about in years. Kiera's mind raced as she tried to recall if she had shared these details with anyone recently. The memories were intimate, personal things she had long forgotten. Her attempts to trace the number were futile, it was blocked. The voice never stayed on long enough for her to ask any questions. It was always the same, distorted, calm, and unnervingly knowledgeable. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Kiera began searching for any clues that could explain the strange calls. She delved into the history of her neighborhood, uncovering a tragic story from decades ago. A young woman named Eliza, who had lived in the same house, had mysteriously disappeared one night, leaving behind only a few cryptic diary entries. Her disappearance had never been solved, and the case had long been forgotten. Kiera's curiosity turned to fear as she read through Eliza's diary. The entries spoke of a stalker, someone who knew every detail of Eliza's life and tormented her with phone calls, just like Kiera was experiencing now. The final entry was particularly chilling. He knows everything. Even the things I thought were mine alone. I can't escape. The diary also mentioned strange occurrences in the house, objects moving on their own, cold spots, and the feeling of being watched. Kiera's heart raced as she realized the similarities to her own experiences. The haunting wasn't new, it was a lingering presence, tied to the house and its dark history. As the calls became more frequent and intense, Kiera felt the walls closing in on her. The voice on the other end seemed to enjoy her discomfort, each call pushing her closer to the edge. She realized she couldn't face this alone and decided to call the police. However, when they arrived, there was no evidence of anyone else in the house, and the calls had stopped. The officers, though sympathetic, couldn't do much without any tangible evidence. Kiera felt isolated, her fear mounting as she wondered if she was losing her mind. Left with no other options, Kiera decided to confront the caller herself. The next time the phone rang, she answered with a newfound determination. "Who are you, and what do you want?" she demanded. The voice chuckled softly. "You already know who I am, Kiera. I'm the one who's been watching, the one who knows." Kiera's blood ran cold. "Eliza," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The voice paused, then continued, "She and I are connected, bound by the same fate. I know your secrets, Kiera, just as I knew hers." The realization hit Kiera like a ton of bricks. The caller was not a physical being, but something darker, a manifestation of the house's tragic past. It fed on fear and thrived on secrets, moving from one victim to the next. Kiera felt a surge of anger and defiance rise within her. She refused to be another victim, another name added to the house's grim history. Kiera knew she had to end this cycle of terror. She gathered the courage to face the entity, refusing to let it control her life any longer. She spoke to it directly, acknowledging her fears and the pain that had lingered in the house for so long. "I know you're here, and I know why you're doing this," she said, her voice steady. "But you can't hurt me anymore. Your time is over." As she spoke, Kiera felt a shift in the atmosphere. The room grew colder, and she could see her breath in the air. The phone in her hand felt like ice. She closed her eyes, focusing on the sound of her own heartbeat, grounding herself in the moment. She imagined a light surrounding her, pushing back against the darkness that had taken root in the house. The calls stopped, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if releasing a long-held burden. Kiera felt a sense of closure, not just for herself but for Eliza as well. The haunting presence faded, leaving behind only the echoes of a tragic past. In the days that followed, Kiera moved out of the house, determined to start anew. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she could choose not to let it define her future. The experience had left her stronger, more resilient, and unafraid of the unknown. She vowed never to forget the lessons she had learned, that sometimes the scariest things are not the monsters under the bed, but the secrets we keep hidden, even from ourselves. When my friend Alex asked me to house sit for him while he was away on a family trip, I was eager for a change of pace. Alex's house, a grand Victorian on the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood, promised a serene escape from the chaos of college life. The house, with its ornate woodwork and expansive, shadow-filled rooms, exuded a charm that was both inviting and a little unsettling. As Alex showed me around, he seemed unusually eager to emphasize one particular point: the basement. "Whatever you do," he said with a hint of urgency, "stay out of the basement. There's nothing down there you need to see." His tone was light, but his eyes conveyed a seriousness that made me pause. I dismissed it as Alex's way of adding a bit of drama to the ordinary task of house-sitting. After all, it wasn't unusual for people to have their quirks about certain parts of their homes. The first night was peaceful, filled with the comforting hum of the house's old central heating system and the occasional creak of wooden floorboards. I settled into the guest room, but as I drifted off to sleep, the quietude of the house seemed almost too perfect, like a prelude to something unsettling. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a series of odd noises. At first, it was a faint, rhythmic thumping, almost like footsteps. I told myself it was the house settling, a natural occurrence in old buildings. But the sounds grew more pronounced, punctuated by what seemed like muffled whispers. My curiosity was piqued, and despite Alex's explicit instructions, I found myself drawn to the basement. The basement door was locked, but a quick search revealed an old key tucked away in a drawer, which seemed to fit. My heart raced as I approached the door, the sounds growing louder with each step. With a mix of apprehension and excitement, I unlocked the door and descended the creaky stairs, flashlight in hand. The basement was a vast, dark space filled with old furniture covered in dust sheets, boxes stacked haphazardly, and cobwebs draping from the ceiling. The air was musty, heavy with the scent of mold and neglect. The eerie silence of the basement was broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe. As I wandered through the clutter, I felt a creeping unease. The diary I had found in the chest earlier seemed to call out to me. I picked it up, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The cover was worn and the pages yellowed with age. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, my flashlight casting a flickering beam across the text. The diary belonged to a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the house decades ago. Her entries began with cheerful accounts of her family life, but as I read on, a darker narrative emerged. Margaret described strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, an ever-present feeling of being watched, and unsettling voices coming from the basement. Her husband's behavior had grown increasingly erratic, and he had become obsessed with the idea that something malevolent resided in the basement. Margaret's final entries were frantic and fragmented. She wrote about her husband's descent into madness and a growing dread that suffused their home. The diary detailed a chilling encounter in the basement where Margaret had seen a shadowy figure and entity that seemed to feed off their fear. Her last entry was cut off abruptly, leaving behind a haunting message: we can't escape the darkness that lurks here. It knows our secrets. As I finished reading, the noises from the basement seemed to intensify. The air grew colder, and a palpable sense of dread settled over me. I could feel the oppressive weight of Margaret's words and the dark presence she had described. The whispers turned into growls, and the shadows in the basement seemed to come alive. I quickly closed the diary and climbed the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I spent the rest of the night on edge, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the walls creaking and groaning as if protesting my intrusion. The noises continued, now accompanied by a faint, eerie melody that seemed to come from nowhere. My anxiety mounted, and I found myself pacing the house, unable to find solace in any corner. At dawn, I gathered my courage and decided to confront whatever was haunting the basement. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of grim determination, I descended once more into the darkness. The basement was eerily silent now, the oppressive atmosphere seemingly waiting for me. I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone down here?" There was no response, only the echo of my voice bouncing off the walls. As I moved further into the basement, I noticed something strange. The boxes and furniture seemed to be arranged differently than before. It was as if they had been moved during the night. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I could almost sense the presence of something lurking in the shadows. Desperation led me to a corner of the basement where I found an old mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. As I wiped it clean, I caught a glimpse of something behind me, a shadowy figure moving swiftly. My heart pounded as I turned around, but there was nothing there. I felt a cold breath on my neck, and a voice, low and sinister, whispered in my ear, "You should not have come here." Panic surged through me. I raced up the stairs, not daring to look back. The basement door slammed shut behind me, and I locked it with shaking hands. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. The diary, the noises, and the dark presence had convinced me that the house was not a place where I could remain safely. When Alex returned, I was waiting for him outside, my face pale and my hands trembling. I handed him the diary and recounted everything that had happened. His expression shifted from confusion to shock as he read Margaret's account. Alex was visibly disturbed, acknowledging that there were rumors about the house's dark history that he had dismissed as mere folklore. Alex decided to investigate further and promised to seek professional help for the house. As we left, I took one last look at the Victorian house, its dark windows seeming to watch us as we drove away. The experience had left me shaken, but also with a sense of resolve. I knew that I had encountered something beyond my understanding, something tied to the house's past. In the weeks that followed, Alex kept me updated on his findings. He discovered that Margaret's family had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and the house had been plagued by a series of unexplained events ever since. While he had taken steps to address the haunting, the house remained a place of dark history, its secrets still lurking in the shadows. For me, the ordeal was a reminder of the unknown and the power of history to shape our present. The basement's secrets were now part of my own story, a chilling experience that I would never forget. As I moved forward, I carried with me the lessons of that night, an awareness of the shadows that dwell in forgotten corners and the courage to confront them, even when the darkness seems insurmountable. When my parents left for their weekend getaway, a mix of excitement and apprehension coursed through me. The old Victorian house, a relic of a bygone era, stood on the edge of our small town. It had been in the family for generations, and its age showed in every creak and groan. The house, with its towering spires and intricate woodwork, always seemed both majestic and eerie. My parents had been adamant that I should stay alone, confident in my ability to handle the solitude. I agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly out of a desire to prove my independence. The first night passed without incident. The house's silence was punctuated only by the occasional sigh of settling wood and the distant murmur of the town. My room was on the second floor, overlooking the hallway that seemed to stretch endlessly into shadows. I felt a pang of nostalgia and unease as I remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell, tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained phenomena. Shaking off these thoughts, I prepared for a relaxing evening. The second day began with a strange sense of foreboding. I busied myself with chores and enjoyed the solitude of the house, but soon I noticed anomalies that defied logical explanation. Doors that I had shut tight creaked open by themselves, and cold spots appeared in various rooms despite the warm weather outside. I initially attributed these disturbances to drafts or the house's age, but the unease lingered. By late afternoon, the unsettling occurrences escalated. The temperature in the living room dropped abruptly, and I could see my breath forming faint clouds in the air. I tried to ignore the chill, but it persisted. As I prepared for bed, the house seemed to come alive with the sound of footsteps echoing from somewhere below. I was alone, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. That night, as I prepared to turn in, I saw it again, a dark, indistinct shadow standing behind the door at the end of the hallway. It seemed to shift and move with an eerie fluidity, almost as if it were alive. My heart pounded as I stared at it, convinced that it must be some form of practical joke. My immediate reaction was to confront whatever or whoever was responsible. I grabbed a flashlight and approached the door with trepidation. Each step I took seemed to amplify the oppressive atmosphere of the house. The figure was still there when I reached the door, but as I tried to open it, the shadow vanished. I searched the hallway thoroughly, checking every nook and cranny, but found nothing. The sense of dread was palpable, and despite my efforts, sleep eluded me. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to investigate the history of the house. The attic, filled with forgotten relics and dust-covered boxes, seemed like the perfect place to start. Among the clutter, I discovered a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and its pages yellowed with age. The journal belonged to Eleanor, a previous occupant who had mysteriously disappeared years before. The entries in Eleanor's journal were a disturbing revelation. She described feeling an oppressive presence in the house with shadows that moved on their own and an unshakable feeling of being watched. Her writing became increasingly erratic, reflecting her growing fear and paranoia. Eleanor mentioned hearing whispers and seeing figures that seemed to watch her from the corners of her vision. Her final entries spoke of a growing darkness that threatened to consume her sanity. The journal ended abruptly, its last page marred by frantic scrawls. With this new information, I felt a mix of fear and resolve. The shadowy figure I had encountered seemed to align with Eleanor's descriptions of a malevolent presence. The occurrences in the house grew more intense. Doors slammed shut with a force that rattled the frames, and the cold spots spread, becoming more pronounced. The shadow seemed to grow bolder, moving closer and more frequently. One night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I set up a camera to capture any evidence and prepared myself mentally for whatever might come. As the hours passed, the house fell into an eerie silence. The shadow appeared again, more defined and aggressive than before. It seemed to move with purpose, its presence almost tangible. Despite my attempts to approach it, the shadow would always retreat, eluding my grasp. Desperate for a solution, I recalled Eleanor's journal and the ritual she had described. The ritual was intended to appease a restless spirit and involved acknowledging its presence and offering a token of peace. I gathered some of Eleanor's belongings, items I had found in the attic, and set them up in a makeshift altar in the hallway where the shadow had first appeared. As I performed the ritual, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The temperature dropped dramatically, and a sense of anticipation filled the air. I spoke the words from the journal, offering my apology and acknowledging the spirit's pain. The shadow seemed to waver, its form flickering, as if struggling against an unseen force. The air grew heavy with a sense of finality, I could feel the oppressive presence lifting, and the shadow's aggressive behavior began to subside. The house, which had been a prison of fear and uncertainty, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. I completed the ritual, feeling a profound sense of exhaustion and peace. When my parents returned, I shared the details of the haunting experience with them. They were concerned and intrigued by the story and decided to take additional measures to ensure the house's safety. We arranged for the house to be blessed and for a paranormal investigation to uncover any lingering issues. The investigation confirmed that the house had been a site of intense activity linked to Eleanor's disappearance. The shadow had been a manifestation of her unresolved anguish. With the ritual performed and the house's history addressed, the shadow never returned. The old Victorian house returned to its previous state, quiet, still, and seemingly untouched by the terror it had once harbored. Reflecting on the experience, I realized that the ordeal had changed me. It had taught me about the power of history and the importance of confronting the past. The house, with all its secrets and shadows, was no longer just a family heirloom. It was a place where the past had come alive, and where I had faced my fears with determination and courage. The shadow behind the door was no longer just a figment of my imagination, but a tangible reminder of the need to acknowledge and address the darkness that lurks in forgotten corners. The Victorian house, now peaceful, stood as a testament to the strength required to face the unknown and the resilience needed to find peace in the midst of fear. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.